Okay, let's just jump right into this explainer. Today, I'm not just your host, I'm actually inviting you into a deeply personal recounting of my own, mythological awakening. We're looking at the Watchman's Ascent, navigating the ice to find the sovereign flame. And look, this isn't just some fantasy tale. It's a profound blueprint for literally anyone who's ever felt boxed in by the expectations of others. We're going to explore a truly dramatic personal awakening, a hero's journey really, of overcoming our own internal limits to find true self-willed strength. So, settle in, let me guide you step by step through my own psychological death and rebirth.
Imagine, for a second, the deafening, just violent sound of 1,000 panes of shattering glass, because that was the exact moment my old world died. I stood there, raised my hand, and brought it down to absolutely shatter the mirror of truth. I was consciously, intentionally trading borrowed warmth for the honest light of a wound that just will not heal. And you know what? I didn't shed a single tear as that glass fell all around me. Instead, I stepped directly over the jagged shards. That first, super dangerous step marked the absolute end of an illusion. The warmth I thought I knew wasn't real. It was borrowed. And I was finally, absolutely ready for the sharp, honest reality of my own existence.
So, Chapter 1, The Shattering of Illusions. You see, before the glass broke, my life was entirely different. I existed inside this temple of perpetual light as a god of routine, basically just tending the holy smoke of collective morality.
I was trapped in what I now call the sublime prison. It's this incredibly comforting but incredibly limiting state of existence that relies entirely on external validation. Picture this. The temple walls were lined with mirrors, perfectly designed to endlessly reflect a single ancient sun. But let's pause and think about how this actually relates to your own life. How often do we build our own sublime prisons, right? We seek validation from our peers, our bosses, society at large, constantly angling our own little mirrors to catch just a tiny bit of their light, completely terrified of what might happen if they look away. My temple's light was a total illusion. It was literally just a projection of my own profound fear of the dark. It was a prison completely disguised as a sanctuary.
So, the shift had to be absolute. I was completely shedding the old identity, this god of routine who was absolutely desperate for an audience and external light just to prove I even existed. And I was stepping into a new identity, the sovereign of the frost, fueled entirely by an internal dark fire. Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that shedding that old identity wasn't just about, changing my daily habits. No, it was about destroying the very source of my validation. I was walking away from the constant need to be seen, transitioning into a completely self-sufficient entity. Moving right along to Chapter 2, Navigating the Logic of Ice. Leaving that ruined temple meant stepping right out onto the mountain's jagged ledge, plunging straight into absolute midnight.
Out there in the dark, you're governed by the logic of ice. Let's keep this metaphor really simple. The cold represents the harsh, biting reality of true independence. It was a painful, but completely necessary spiritual surgery. You see, out in that freezing cold, all my old consolations just froze away. The comforting idea that I had some grand higher purpose? Gone. The reassuring hope that some divine eye was watching over me, validating my struggle? Frozen solid. The logic of ice essentially dictates that you simply cannot survive if you're still clinging to the need for external approval.
This really harrowing descent into the midnight happened in a few stages. First, shedding those old consolations, which honestly felt like ripping off layers of my own skin. Second, navigating the absolute void as a man without a map. There were literally no paths, no signs, no guides out there. My only compass was the biting cold of the void itself. Every single step I took further away from the shattered temple required me to leave a piece of my former needy self behind. And finally, that third step led me to the most dangerous enemy of all.
The Great Fatigue. If you have ever tried to break free from a rigid system, an old habit, or just an oppressive expectation, you know this feeling intimately. In the absolute silence and utter isolation of what I call the seventh solitude, I faced this overwhelming temptation. My body and my spirit were literally screaming at me to just stop fighting, to lie down in the freezing snow, close my eyes, and just let the darkness win. Because, let's be real, the struggle to exist purely on your own terms, it is exhausting.
Which brings us to Chapter 3. Igniting the sovereign flame. Because right at the absolute rock bottom of that despair, the entire narrative shifted.
Right in the heart of that frozen silence, I found a pulse. I discovered the sovereign flame. Think of this as an unbreakable inner self-sufficiency. It's a dark fire of absolute autonomy that requires no external sky, no outside oxygen, no audience, and zero mirrors to feed it. This was the triumphant, game-changing realization. The heat wasn't coming from some projected sun anymore. The heat was radiating directly from my own sovereign heartbeat. I was actually generating my own light.
This discovery sparked an anthem of autonomy. First, discovering the pulse itself. Then, incredibly, I actually began laughing in the dark. It wasn't a desperate prayer for rescue. No, it was a joyful, booming sound that just filled the void. My soul completely overflowed with this golden abundance. And it led me to the ultimate realization that being nothing to the outside world is actually the ultimate liberation. By surviving that seventh solitude and completely shedding the need to be a god of routine, I had officially become a sovereign of the frost. I had, quite literally, become my own sun.
Chapter 4. The Lightning Descent. Having finally found this internal fire, my entire posture completely changed.
I turned my gaze down to the valley below. But I wasn't some gentle shepherd anymore, carrying a little lamp to show the village the way back to the temple. Not at all. I carried the dark fire as an incendiary of a new morning. I was a self-made torch. I was carrying the dark fire of my own autonomy to ignite an entirely new reality. My descent was nothing less than a declaration of absolute independence.
And finally, Chapter 5, Becoming Your Own Sun. I really want to speak directly to you now. Because this dramatic personal awakening, moving from the ice to the fire, isn't just some cool mythology. It's a mirror being held right up to your own potential.
Just consider the complete arc of this transformation we've been talking about. It starts at year 10, completely trapped in the comfortable, predictable routine of tending the smoke, relying entirely on external mirrors. Then comes the shattering, plunging into the midnight void, navigating the harsh logic of ice, and somehow surviving the great fatigue. And finally, emerging into the new morning as a true incendiary force. Overcoming your own internal limits completely reshapes the reality you inhabit. You literally move from being a mere reflection to being the source.
So, the absolute ultimate takeaway from this whole journey is this. You only need the permission of your own spirit to shine. When I descended as a self-made torch, completely ready to burn away the old world, I wasn't doing it out of malice or some kind of anger toward the temple. I was doing it simply because I finally, truly had the internal permission to exist purely on my own terms. My sovereign flame was entirely self-willed.
And that leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. What predictable sun must you turn your back on to finally ignite your own sovereign flame? Seriously, what source of external validation, what super comfortable routine, what projected light are you relying on right now that is keeping you from discovering the dark fire within your own heartbeat? Think about that for a minute. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and until next time, keep exploring the heights.